Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you're probably someone who uh, likes to make sense of the world. You look for patterns, for
Clear
frameworks.
definitions.
Exactly. But lately, you've probably noticed that, well, the patterns are breaking. You might have that kind of gnawing, persistent feeling that the world just isn't operating under the same rules we all grew up with.
It's that feeling, isn't it? The sense that the foundational systems we all rely on, things like, global supply chains, geopolitical stability, even just the simple predictability of daily life,
Mhm.
are suddenly starting to misbehave.
And not just misbehave, but often violently and without any warning.
Right. And the old methods we had for coping with uncertainty, the frameworks we used for so long to manage risk and plan for the future, they're just, they're not adequate anymore. Not for the intensity of the disruptions hitting us now.
So we're beyond just a rough patch.
Oh, way beyond. We are, I think, truly in what you could call an age of chaos.
And what's crucial, and what we're going to explore today, is that the very language we use to describe disorder, the acronyms that define strategic thinking for a whole generation, it all feels completely hollow now.
It does. It doesn't capture the feeling, the reality of it.
Which is why we are dedicating this entire deep dive to a critical new piece of modern sense-making, the BANI framework.
BANI, it's an acronym, and it stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible.
Okay, let's just say that again. Brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible.
That's it. It was developed by the futurist and foresight specialist Germain Cassio, starting around 2018. And it's a necessary framework because it moves beyond just describing instability. It gives a precise name to the different ways we feel like our world is falling apart.
It helps articulate the sheer scale and the quality of the disruption we've all been feeling for the last few years.
Exactly.
So our mission today is pretty comprehensive. We're going to unpack BANI in detail, really drill down into what each of those four conditions means and why they define this chaotic era.
We'll also look at why the old language of disorder failed us, why it just doesn't cut it anymore.
Right, and most importantly, we are going to spend a good amount of time on the necessary response, the mental models and mindsets we need to actually thrive in chaos. The research calls this positive BANI.
Which is really about transforming our response from,
Uh-huh.
dread and anxiety into clarity and action.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start at the beginning. If we're now using BANI, it means that the framework that came before it, the one that served us for decades, finally became obsolete. So why did we need a new language in the first place?
You absolutely have to start with VUCA. I mean, for over 30 years, it was the default language for any kind of strategic planning.
Both in the military and in the corporate world, right?
Absolutely everywhere.
Hmm.
And VUCA, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
And its origins are really key to understanding its purpose. This didn't come out of a Silicon Valley startup.
Not at all.
Mhm.
It originated in the U.S. Army War College, way back in the late 1980s. It was explicitly designed to help military leaders make sense of the new environment that was defined by the collapse of the Soviet Union.
So a post-Cold War setting. Increasingly digital, more globally interconnected, a world where all the old certainties were just gone.
Precisely. And VUCA was brilliant for its time. It started in that military context, as you said, and then it spread like wildfire into business strategy by the early 2000s. It perfectly illustrated a world of, let's call it, everyday disorder.
So it acknowledged that things were moving fast. That's the volatile part.
Right. And that the future was unclear, which is uncertain.
Situations had a lot of moving parts, complex.
And information could be interpreted in multiple ways. Ambiguous. It was a really solid framework for that era.
And all the tools that were developed to manage this environment, they were all about creating structure for that indefiniteness, weren't they? Things like futures thinking, scenario planning, simulations.
All of it. The goal was to work within a VUCA environment by defining the parameters of what could happen. It was like trying to put a fence around the chaos to make it manageable.
So then I have to ask the big question. If VUCA was so effective at defining that kind of disorder, why the shift? Why is the argument now that VUCA has become, and I'm quoting here, increasingly obsolete? Is BANI just a fancier way of saying the same thing?
And that's a fair challenge. It
Wow.
really gets to the heart of the matter. The core argument is that the environment VUCA describes so well. Well, that's just become our default condition now.
It's just normal.
It's the new normal. We are so completely saturated with volatility and complexity. They're just the price of admission for living in the 21st century, that using the acronym provides less and less insight.
So it no longer distinguishes a specific situation, it's just a descriptor of the status quo.
Exactly. If you say your supply chain is volatile and complex today, you're just describing every supply chain in 2024. The term loses its strategic edge because it doesn't give you any advantage in managing the problem.
It's like standing in the middle of a tsunami and trying to describe the situation by just saying the word wet.
That is the perfect analogy. It's technically accurate, but it's profoundly insufficient for actually navigating the danger. The sources we're looking at argue that we've moved beyond mere complexity and uncertainty into a state of sheer chaos.
And they use this really powerful analogy from chemistry to describe this shift. They call it a phase change in reality.
Yes, we're no longer just happily bubbling along in a complex world where we can manage risk. Now, the boiling has begun. The underlying conditions have changed so fundamentally that the scale of disruption is just on a completely different magnitude.
And this is where BANI comes in.
This is where BANI steps in. It's designed as an intentional parallel to VUCA, but it's built to address the nature of disruption at this new accelerated scale.
So when systems don't just bend but fail catastrophically,
Or when outcomes are not just hard to predict, but seem completely absurd and unpredictable.
and when individual anxiety becomes a defining feature of the whole societal landscape.
Right. In those conditions, simple volatility or complexity just aren't sufficient lenses anymore. BANI is the framework we need for true chaos.
So BANI isn't just a replacement, it's an escalation. It suggests that the environment isn't just unstable anymore, it's actively hostile to our traditional predictive models.
It is. BANI eliminates the scale of these disruptions and the fundamentally new challenges they present. It's designed to give a name to that visceral, experiential feeling that the world is falling apart.
It helps us see the specific shapes this age of chaos takes when, as the source says, everything insists on coloring outside the lines.
And it operates at the systemic level, describing these huge global shifts. But also, and I think this is critical, it works powerfully at the human level. It describes our emotional response to those shifts.
So understanding these four letters is the critical first step to developing strategies that can actually work in this new reality.
It's the prerequisite.
Let's do it. We need to drill down into each letter, starting with B. What does it mean for a system to be brittle?
When I hear brittle, my mind immediately goes to glass. Something that looks solid, permanent, strong.
Right up until the point it shatters without any warning.
Exactly. And that's how it translates to a modern global system. Brittle systems are defined by their susceptibility to sudden and catastrophic failure. They have what's called an illusory strength.
Illusory strength. I like that. So it feels resilient, but it's not. It's anti-resilience.
It is. They might absorb small shocks. They might seem fine for years. But when they finally hit their breaking point, their inflection point of failure, they don't bend. They don't break gracefully. They just completely shatter.
There's no proportional response. The failure is total.
It's total. And the sources point directly to the cause. Our pervasive cultural obsession with maximizing hyper-efficiency.
That's the core driver, isn't it?
It's the core driver. Brittleness often comes from the effort to wring every last bit of value, whether that's money or time or power or inventory from a system. And this process, by its very nature, systematically removes all the slack.
And slack is your buffer.
Slack is your buffer. It's what allows a system to absorb an unforeseen shock. When you move to a just-in-time inventory model, you maximize your efficiency and your profit in the short term, but you are simultaneously introducing extreme fragility.
So one single blockage, a ship gets stuck in a canal, a localized pandemic shutdown somewhere.
And the entire global supply chain seizes up. The efficiency was a temporary strength, but that lack of resilience was the fatal flaw.
The historical examples really drive this home. The sources talk about the historical potato famine, where an entire country depended on a single crop monoculture.
It worked brilliantly. I mean, it was hyper-efficient production.
Until the single blight arrived and wiped out the entire food source, leading to total societal collapse in some of those regions.
Or you can think about the resource curse, where a region focuses all of its economic energy on extracting one natural resource. It can create massive wealth and stability for a while.
Until a new technology or a market shift makes that resource functionally worthless.
And that economy, which looks so robust, it just shatters instantly because it has no foundational diversity. It has no slack in its structure. It was built on one brittle pillar.
And our modern interconnectedness just makes everything worse, doesn't it? A century ago, a catastrophic failure like that might have been contained regionally.
Sure.
But now, because our systems are so tightly interwoven, a catastrophic breakdown in one seemingly peripheral area, like a debt crisis in a smaller economy, or a localized political uprising, it can cause these global ripple effects that quickly become systemic risks for everyone, everywhere.
And this is the most terrifying part, I think. This brittleness is now manifesting in our intangible systems.
Like democracy.
Exactly. Democracy relies so heavily on shared facts, on trust, on accountability for intentional mistruths. When that common ground erodes, when accountability for spreading disinformation weakens, the system itself reviews its fragility.
So it might look like it's functioning normally on the surface.
But underneath, the very foundation of trust has cracked. And that signals it's on the precipice of collapse. It's a terrifying condition. Strength that is entirely illusory, just waiting to fail completely at the touch of some unforeseen stressor.
A system that signals it's strong right up until the moment it fails completely. That loss of foundational certainty, that loss of control, it naturally leads us right to A for anxious.
And anxiety in the BANI context it's far beyond just mere stress. It is a deep, persistent feeling of helplessness that's tied to the loss of control. It's the paralyzing fear that every single decision we make is potentially disastrous.
We're constantly waiting for the next crisis.
We are. It's that constant surveillance of the impending disaster.
Right.
The source's description of F5 Friday, just constantly smashing the refresh key on your browser to see what new horror shows up next, that perfectly captures the feeling.
That mix of hypervigilance and total powerlessness.
Yes. And this pervasive systemic anxiety, it has profound behavioral consequences. It can drive absolute passivity.
The idea that we can't make the wrong choice if we simply don't choose at all.
It sounds logical in a strange way. The inaction becomes this desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control by refusing to even participate in the unstable environment.
Or, on the flip side, it can manifest as just despair.
We see this so tragically reflected in global trends, that horrifying realization some people have that the fundamental life choices they made, the hard work, the education, the honest effort, were actually wrong. Or they were based on premises that have just proven to be dead ends.
The realization that control was never really possible.
It can be devastating.
Yeah.
It can lead to a profound loss of meaning. And this anxiety isn't just happening in a vacuum. It's being systematically enhanced by our modern information ecosystem.
Or media and social platforms.
They are perfectly designed to hijack our basic cognitive processes, stimulating excitement, outrage, and fear. They prioritize the immediate, the sensational, the thing that grabs your attention, over what's actually accurate or contextualized.
And this is where we have to unpack the concept of malinformation. You mentioned it as the crystallization of these anxiety triggers. This is more than just bad facts, isn't it?
Oh, much more. When we talk about bad knowledge, we're talking about a whole spectrum. Misinformation is, incorrect information that's spread by accident.
Right.
Disinformation is information that's spread intentionally to deceive. But malinformation is an even broader, more corrosive category.
It includes things like hoaxes, pseudoscience,
Propaganda, and even what some call fake news. The tactic of claiming true, inconvenient information is fake.
The collective result of this malinformation environment is a profound overwhelming of our ability to find the signal in the noise. It breeds this deep insecurity about reality itself.
It does. And its insecurity drives some really paradoxical coping mechanisms. If the world is truly incomprehensible and chaotic, and I feel powerless, how do I regain my sanity? The sources point out that a lot of people adapt by embracing charismatic figures, or they find comfort in conspiracy theories.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive. How could believing in a vast, malevolent conspiracy possibly be calming?
Because even a malevolent explanation is an explanation. It restores the illusion of control and coherence. It suggests the world isn't random. It's being run by someone, even if that someone is evil.
And that's less terrifying to the human mind than the idea that these vast, complex global events are just unfolding randomly with no one at the controls.
Infinitely less terrifying. It allows the anxious mind to trade that existential dread for a defined enemy. But tragically, that feeling of security comes at the cost of accepting reality. And that just leads to further systemic brittleness down the line.
That fundamental loss of certainty where effort and outcomes seem completely disconnected, it leads us directly to the next letter, N, for nonlinear.
Nonlinearity. This means that cause and effect are seemingly disconnected or just wildly disproportionate.
So you put in a massive amount of effort and you get these minuscule results.
Or, conversely, a tiny, almost accidental decision has massive, unforeseen consequences in its scale, its scope, or its timing. The world just ceases to function in a predictable, straight line.
And the world is full of examples of this radical disproportionality.
It really is. I mean, think about how a haphazard, low-effort online video, maybe created by a few anonymous users, can shake up corporate boardrooms and disrupt multi-billion-dollar international markets.
The scale of the cause, a few hours of recording versus the effect, like mass capital flight or a major policy change, is just, it's wildly out of proportion.
And we see this so clearly in modern conflict. Terrorism is the ultimate example of nonlinear warfare. The low cost and the minimal effort required to execute a single, isolated attack.
Versus the enormous multi-trillion-dollar cost and effort spent by nations to try to spot it, prevent it, and then respond to it. The sheer imbalance is the definition of nonlinearity in a strategic context.
And we all had a global object lesson in this with the COVID-19 pandemic. The spread was staggeringly nonlinear. It was exponential growth, moving far beyond anything in our everyday human experience.
The global mobilization to flatten the curve was, at its heart, a desperate war against the mathematical nature of nonlinearity. We were trying to force the system back into a manageable, linear growth pattern.
But maybe the most challenging aspect for the human brain to process is the nonlinearity of time. And this is the concept of hysteresis, which Cascio really emphasizes in the sources.
Hysteresis, can you break that down?
Hysteresis describes a long, significant lag between a cause and the full manifestation of its effect. The system has this massive inertia. You can think of it like bending a piece of metal. You apply the force, and for a moment, nothing seems to happen. And then suddenly, it yields far down the line.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the most profound illustration of this is the climate crisis. The growing intensity and frequency of the chaos we're seeing today, the extreme weather events, the rapid melting, is primarily the result of carbon emissions from way back up through the 1970s and 1980s.
That time lag is because of the tremendous inertia in the global climate system, particularly in the oceans. The oceans absorb most of the heat and carbon, but they take decades to fully circulate and show the resulting temperature increases.
And the implication of that is just stunning.
It is. It means that even if, by some miracle, we stopped all carbon emissions right this second, we would still see additional warming and continued high temperatures for at least another generation.
Our brains just didn't evolve to calculate risk across those kinds of time spans. We are wired for immediate feedback loops. I touch a hot stove, I get burned.
Right. Simple cause and effect.
But when our efforts today are punishing us for decisions made 50 years ago, and our current massive efforts won't show their full stabilizing results for another 20 or 30 years, it just destroys the incentive structure. It makes decision-making profoundly difficult.
It cements that feeling that the world is operating entirely out of balance.
And when we can no longer reasonably trace the cause to the effect, the results start to seem illogical, senseless, or our final letter, I, incomprehensible.
Incomprehensibility, as BANI defines it, is the end state of information overload. It's not that we're suffering from a lack of information. We're absolutely drowning in it.
To the point where additional data, even big data, has become counterproductive.
It has. It just overwhelms our ability to distinguish the essential signal from the overwhelming noise. And it leaves us with events and decisions that seem utterly illogical or absurd.
And it's important to note, this isn't just a technology problem.
Not exclusively, no. There are low-tech examples that really capture the essence. Think about that classic programmer cliché, the piece of software that only works when a particular, seemingly non-functional line of code remains in the program.
You take the line out, the whole system crashes.
And you leave it in, it works perfectly, even though that line appears to do absolutely nothing. Why? It's incomprehensible. The system works, but its logic is completely opaque.
But this opacity is becoming an intrinsic part of our most advanced systems. As machine learning and generative AI systems become more and more complicated, the connections they make within their deep neural networks, they become so numerous and complex that it's impossible for even the programmers who wrote the foundational code to understand precisely how certain decisions are made.
They hit what's called the web of logic wall.
And this isn't just some philosophical riddle. It has serious, immediate regulatory and ethical implications.
Absolutely. If we look at the direction governance is heading, especially in places like the European Union, regulations are increasingly requiring that users of algorithmic systems, whether for lending or hiring or judicial recommendations, be able to explain how and why these systems came to their conclusions.
But if the logic is incomprehensible, we can't satisfy those accountability requirements.
And accountability is vital, because code that learns from us can learn more than just the intended lessons and rules. If the training data reflects human biases, the algorithm won't just replicate them, it will often intensify them.
Leading to unintended racist, sexist, and discriminatory outcomes.
Right. But if that logic web is opaque, we can't trace the original error or the specific weightings that caused the bias. How do you fix a system whose inner workings you can't even see?
This leads to that profound paradox we see constantly with AI and autonomous systems. The triumph of complex success right next to random, simple failure.
It's so strange, isn't it? Why can an advanced self-driving car flawlessly execute the incredibly complex task of navigating cross-country traffic at high speed?
Yet randomly smash into a mailbox while simply backing out of a garage. The complex behavior executes perfectly, but the simple action fails randomly and absurdly.
It makes sense that the source suggests this is pushing us into new territory. The human brain has always operated in the realm of the incomprehensible. We're all just, 1,400 grams of unpredictable emotional meat. But the implication is that to navigate a BANI world, that incomprehensible meat might need to partner with a similarly incomprehensible chunk of silicon, the AI. We may be entering an era where partnering with the inexplicable is the only way forward.
Using AI as a tool to help us see patterns that are invisible at a human scale.
Even if we can't entirely explain how the AI is seeing them.
Wow, that thought sets the stage perfectly for the shift. If BANI provides the necessary diagnosis of chaos, we have to move to the prescription.
But mindset that allows us to operate within it, strengthening our systems and ourselves, rather than just surrendering to despair. It's time to move to positive BANI.
The transition from diagnosis to action, this requires a pretty fundamental shift in perspective.
It really does. The sources all stress that the best way to respond to a world that's spinning out of control is not just with a checklist of new projects or policies, it's with an internal, fundamental shift in our mindset.
And that's the essence of positive BANI.
That's it. It's a framework for actively strengthening ourselves, our organizations, and our communities to grapple successfully with this falling apart world.
And what I appreciate about it is that positive BANI feels deeply personal. The original BANI is a lens for seeing systemic disruption. But positive BANI is about empowering the individual or the organization to respond to crises with clarity.
And with resilience, it's about meeting chaos with intentionality. So let's break down the responses, starting with the counter to brittle. The condition of brittle is met by bendable.
Bendable, so it's about embracing fundamental flexibility, rapid adaptation, and most importantly, true resilience.
It's the ability to respond successfully to stressful dynamics that hit with unanticipated intensity or duration or timing. It acknowledges the fatal flaw of hyper-efficiency, that illusory strength, and chooses to invest in functional, durable resilience instead.
We should probably define what resilience means in this context, because it's often misunderstood.
That's a great point. Resilience typically means the ability to return to a former stable state after a shock like a rubber band snapping back to its original shape.
But the sources suggest we need to move towards something more like anti-fragility.
Or adaptive flexibility. The system is designed to get stronger or more capable because of the stress, not just in spite of it. Bendable is the mindset that accepts change as permanent and prepares not for specific threats but for generalized shock.
So the key action here isn't designing some 500-page crisis plan for a pandemic or a specific market crash.
No, it's about building in mental or material preparation that works across a whole range of diverse threats. You build adaptability into the very structure itself.
The Mayo Clinic example during the COVID-19 pandemic really illustrates this.
It's a perfect example. They didn't have a specific plan for a global virus that would demand total physical separation. But, and this is the crucial part, they already had ongoing experiments in telemedicine and virtual care that had been running for years.
So when the crisis hit, they didn't have to invent a system from scratch.
Exactly. They took those existing latent experiments and just scaled them up dramatically and swiftly. They adapted their services, making them more patient-centered through virtual connections. They had the flexibility, they had the slack to bend, not shatter, when maximum stress was applied.
That's such a critical difference. They didn't pre-plan the solution, they pre-planned the capability for a rapid pivot. Okay, so next, the anxious condition is countered by being attentive.
Attentive. And this means actively seeking to recognize and respond to anxiety both in yourself and in others by fostering psychological safety and maintaining an awareness of the bigger picture.
So when the world is telling everyone that they're powerless, attentiveness is about restoring a sense of agency.
It is. And this requires deep empathy. We have to be sensitive to the kinds and scale of challenges others are genuinely facing, moving past the media-fueled hype to the actual human-level impact. But the sources are clear that this begins with self-care.
Right. You can't be attentive to others if you yourself are completely overwhelmed and traumatized.
You can't. Attentiveness has to include taking care of one's own anxiety. And paradoxically, the personal experiences of hardship and trauma that often lead us to self-isolate can actually be transformed into a powerful tool for building trust and connection with others.
Because recognizing that shared vulnerability becomes a foundation for collective psychological safety.
Exactly. And when you look at organizational responses, the key is consistency and focus. United Way Worldwide, for instance, models an approach that combines active empathy by staying centered on the most affected communities, listening carefully for their ideas, and focusing on lasting systemic impact rather than just quick fixes.
And staying connected for the long term.
It's an approach built on a steady, reliable presence in chaotic times. Anxious environments need reliable anchors, not explosive, temporary interventions. The anxiety that thrives on sensationalism and immediate fear is calmed by the steady, empathetic drumbeat of long-term commitment and mutual respect.
Okay, now, when we talk about nonlinearity, that disproportionality in the time lags, the response needs to be equally adaptive and unpredictable. And the solution is neuroflexible.
Neuroflexibility is, in essence, radical improvisation. It is the ability to recognize rapidly changing conditions and adjust your actions and choices on the fly.
Avoiding being tied too closely to rigid, expected scripts amid these evolving circumstances.
When the map no longer matches the territory, you have to be willing to throw the map away.
And this requires more than just intelligence. It requires a deep, embedded willingness to keep multiple alternative approaches actively in mind.
It does. If we are too deeply invested in one particular way of doing things, one strategic plan, one market model, the moment a nonlinear shock hits, that system seizes up and becomes brittle.
So the crucial component is the willingness to recognize unexpected conditions and have the courage to just toss out the pre-planned correct response.
And the sources provide the ultimate example of this, highlighting how neuroflexibility can, quite literally, determine global survival.
This is the story of Stanislav Petrov. It's an incredible story, and it really brings this concept to life.
In 1983, Petrov was a Soviet missile defense officer on duty during a time of extremely high tension with the U.S. And his system, designed by the greatest minds in Soviet technology, suddenly indicated an incoming American nuclear attack.
And his protocol was crystal clear.
He was the officer who had literally written the military's own book on how to respond. Immediately relay the warning up the chain of command, which would trigger a potential full-scale nuclear counterattack.
The stakes could not possibly have been higher.
Unimaginable. But in that crucial, terrifying moment, he paused. He noticed the odd, disproportionate aspect of the warning. The system only reported 5 incoming American missiles.
Just 5, and that detail was the key.
It was. He reasoned that any actual American first strike would involve hundreds of missiles to overwhelm Soviet defenses, not just 5. So he rejected the official pre-planned military script and protocol.
And correctly identified the situation as a catastrophic computer false alarm.
And had he followed his own military training and protocol, that alert would have escalated almost certainly into a global thermonuclear war, possibly ending civilization as we know it.
Petrov's act of neuroflexibility, his willingness to ignore the pre-programmed response and trust his own instantaneous assessment of the chaotic, nonlinear data, it literally saved the world.
It is the ultimate example of writing the book and then having the profound situational awareness and courage to throw the book out when reality demands it.
That is just so powerful. To be neuroflexible is to prioritize reality over adherence to procedure. Okay, finally, to counter the incomprehensible condition, we must be interconnected.
Interconnectedness is all about establishing mutual communication across a network of diverse minds. And when we say diverse, the sources really stress that variety in perspective, culture, background, and expertise is vastly more important than sheer numbers.
So a small team with highly differentiated worldviews is exponentially more capable of dealing with the incomprehensible than a huge army of like-minded thinkers.
Precisely. Because when the logic web is opaque, like with the AI black box or a totally absurd geopolitical event, you need multiple, vastly different lenses applied to the dilemma at the same time.
If everyone shares the same assumptions, they're all going to fail to see the same blind spot.
Right. You need people who can make wide-ranging connections across disciplinary boundaries. They're often the catalyst for transformative change. They can look at that inscrutable line of code and say, wait a minute, that actually reminds me of a structural weakness in classical mechanics, or that bias looks like a pattern from 19th century history.
We see a perfect modern example of this in the medical field. The development of the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine, the work of Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, among others, it required intensive interconnectedness.
Oh, absolutely. Her work at the National Institutes of Health and then later at Moderna required bringing together a massive variety of specialists. Molecular biologists, immunologists, public health experts, material scientists, logistics specialists.
And it wasn't a linear process where one group just handed off their work to the next.
Not at all. It was intense, rapid mutual communication and synthesis across all those disciplinary boundaries that catalyzed one of the most transformative medical breakthroughs in modern history.
So the overall takeaway for positive BANI is that it's an engine of clarity. It's a mindset that embraces wide-ranging perspectives, recognizes the signs of rapid phase change, and allows for continuous reevaluation.
And it rejects the deadly trap of seeking certainty in a chaotic BANI world.
The BANI framework provides the structure, but the sources also point out that people are increasingly turning to other methods, often ancient methods, to build the internal resilience required for positive BANI.
It's about creating a holistic, robust, sense-making toolkit that addresses the external chaos with internal fortitude.
It's a recognition that the chaos isn't just external, it's being amplified by our own internal restlessness and our inability to focus.
And one fascinating perspective that's introduced is how ancient Indian yoga systems can actively prime the mind for the BANI response, especially for attentiveness and neuroflexibility.
How does ancient yoga relate to modern chaos?
Well, yoga, at its core, promises clarity, inner strength, and an understanding of human potential by focusing on stilling the restlessness of the mind. In a BANI world where media and technology are constantly hijacking our attention and amplifying anxiety, the practice of intentionally quieting the mind becomes a powerful act of resistance and preparation.
And it links directly to that idea of an intentional response versus a subconscious reaction.
Precisely. The practice defines this critical, thin line between instinct, which is a reaction bubbling up from the subconscious, and it's often fear-driven, and intent, which is a conscious, intentional, and considered response.
The goal of yoga is to continuously move the practitioner from that instinctual reaction to conscious intent.
And that clarity and strength are what provide the internal resilience we need to navigate a fast-changing external world without snapping into a brittle, panicking state.
That reframes navigating the BANI age not just as survival, but as a path toward accelerating human capability. We see that powerful quote from Sri Aurobindo in the sources.
Yes, man is a transitional being. He is not final. The step from man to Superman is the next approaching achievement in the Earth's evolution.
So BANI navigation is framed as the environmental pressure needed to push humanity toward a higher consciousness and capability.
It is. And another crucial tool that's mentioned is radical creativity. This comes from the Finnish University Aalto, which intentionally fuses design, art, business, and technology into its curricula. They posit that radical creativity is a necessary survival tool for navigating BANI and VUCA situations.
That collaboration across fields, specifically involving art and design, seems essential for tackling the incomprehensible.
It's critical. Radical creativity acknowledges that when the old models fail, when the world is nonlinear and incomprehensible, you can't solve the problem with existing approaches. You need to be able to design entirely new approaches, new mental maps, new systems that synthesize disparate fields.
You need people trained not just in engineering efficiency, but in conceptual leaps of faith, the kind that come from artistic or design thinking, to make sense of the absurd.
Exactly. And speaking of tested nonlinear models, we also see people returning to military strategic frameworks that were designed for rapid adaptation under pressure. The sources reference John Boyd's OODA loop.
Observe, orient, decide, act.
The OODA loop is entirely about agility and speed. Boyd was a military strategist, and he argued that in any conflict or any chaotic situation, the key is to operate at a faster tempo than your opponent or the crisis itself.
And if we apply OODA to a BANI environment, it really reinforces that neuroflexible idea. First, you observe the shifting, chaotic reality.
Second, you orient, and this is the most crucial step. You update your mental models and you discard the obsolete ones.
Third, you decide on a course of action based on that new orientation. And finally, you act.
And the goal isn't just to complete the loop, it's to complete your loop before the crisis or your competitor can complete theirs, making their actions irrelevant or too slow. In a nonlinear world where the environment is constantly changing, OODA provides a mechanism for rapid improvisation and adaptation.
It allows an organization to remain bendable and neuroflexible, absorbing shocks and constantly refreshing its understanding of the new reality.
And what all these approaches share, yoga, radical creativity, OODA, and positive BANI, is the understanding that the best response isn't a detailed checklist or a single perfect formula. It's about cultivating a mindset that values clarity over certainty.
Clarity, a clear, empathetic, and flexible understanding of the immediate chaotic reality, that's the transformative goal. The desperate quest for absolute certainty is the deadly trap that leads to brittle systems and crippling anxiety.
And this brings us right back to the role of technology. In a world defined by the incomprehensible, the modern learner is asking, how can technology, specifically AI, be used not just as another source of information overload, but as a tool for gaining clarity?
That's a crucial application. If BANI is about sense-making in chaos, then AI becomes an essential partner in that orient phase of the OODA loop.
Indeed. AI, particularly large language models and machine learning systems, excels at pattern recognition across vast, disparate data sets that the human mind simply cannot process.
In a BANI environment, where nonlinearity and incomprehensibility reign, human experts might miss crucial, subtle patterns because the scale is too large or the cause and effect are just too distant in time.
So using AI not as a decision maker, but as a pattern identifier becomes a tool for interconnectedness.
Right. It allows us to process the incomprehensible, making connections that no single human specialist could see.
Exactly. For instance, an organization struggling with a brittle supply chain might use AI to process millions of transactions, weather reports, and geopolitical shifts, and identify subtle emergent risk factors that are nonlinear in nature.
Like a small policy change in one country that, when combined with a specific weather pattern, consistently leads to a major bottleneck 6 months down the road. A human would never see that.
Never. The human role then shifts from being a data cruncher to being a synthesizer and an interpreter. We use AI to gain clarity on the underlying systems, helping us understand the shape of the chaos, even if the algorithm's internal logic remains opaque.
So the human expert applies bendability and neuroflexibility to the raw insight provided by their silicon partner.
It forces us into a necessary and frankly uncomfortable cooperation, working with an entity whose outputs we trust, but whose internal process we can't fully map.
This integration of human intentionality, the intent developed through attentiveness and clarity, with AI's incomprehensible pattern recognition. It's arguably the only viable strategy for long-term navigation in the BANI age.
It requires a certain humility, an acceptance that human expertise is necessary, but it's insufficient on its own.
We have covered a vast amount of ground today, confirming that we have moved past the familiar but now insufficient framework of VUCA.
Into the truly chaotic phase of BANI brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible.
And we've outlined that critical adaptive response framework, meeting that chaos with bendability, attentiveness, neuroflexibility, and interconnectedness.
Which confirms that what we're all experiencing is not a temporary economic downturn or just a political glitch. It is a new fundamental phase change. And it demands a fundamental transformation in our systems and, more importantly, in our thinking.
This awareness, this ability to name that deep, gnawing dread that so many of us feel, is the first crucial step toward developing truly adaptive strategies. BANI validates that feeling. It says, yes, the world is systemically harder to understand now, and that difficulty requires a new toolkit of internal and external responses.
And as we end this deep dive, let's just return one last time to that tension we explored under the incomprehensible condition, the rise of human silicon partnerships.
We noted that both the human brain and advanced AI systems operate in a realm of deep opacity, a web of logic we can't fully explain.
Yet, successful navigation of the BANI age seems to require intense cooperation between these two incomprehensible entities.
At the same time, regulatory bodies aiming to address the anxiety and brittleness of automated systems are increasingly demanding full transparency. They're in pursuit of a perfect explanation to ensure accountability.
So, if we are constantly relying on decision-making systems whose operational logic we cannot fully explain, yet whose pattern recognition capability is vital for our survival.
Then the question remains, is the pursuit of perfect explanation, that insistence on full transparency for every complex algorithmic decision, is that an ultimately brittle approach to dealing with an incomprehensible world?
Or must we accept that clarity on outcome and risk mitigation, not certainty of process, is the necessary goal, even if it means cooperating with systems whose full logic remains shrouded in mystery?
That is something powerful for you, the learner, to mull over as you seek new ways to see the bigger picture and build resilience in this complex age.
It's a challenging but essential thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.